Hi, everyone. Welcome into episode 114 of Hoops Across the Mountain State. Our summer interview series continues. We've spoken with a lot of great individuals. We had our two-part coaches roundtable. We even did one with an official as well. And now, as I mentioned before, we are chatting with the executive director of the WVSSAC, Mr. Bernie Dolan himself. And we got a lot to get into, so let's introduce him. Bernie, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to be into the summer, but we know it's going to be short-lived, and people are in their 3-week windows now, or some are even done. So we're really looking forward to next year.
Absolutely. Well, you are probably one of the busiest men in the state in regards to sports, but how's everything been so far for you?
Actually, obviously this year was better than last year, which was a lot better than the year before. If you remember last year, we were playing baseball right up until the end of June, and really we turned right around, the schools did, into this year. And so this year we're back more on a normal schedule. All of our tournaments went off as scheduled on time, so we feel pretty good about that. We know there'll be some challenges still in the future, but we'll just have to deal with it and move on.
Before we actually get into the bulk of everything, just give a lot of credit to your staff, because I know you all have worked tireless hours over this last year and a half to 2 years, pretty much dating back to when the basketball tournaments back in 2020 were postponed, even canceled for that matter. Just give a lot of credit to yourself. What would you like to say about them? Because they put in a lot of great hours.
Well, first of all, if you remember in 2020, we were making schedules by the day. We would think that, hey, we're going to start on April 14th, and we would have a schedule to get us to the end of the year, and boom, next thing we know, it's off, and we will be back to the thing. And, and so that went on the whole year. And then even last year, there was a lot of struggles with just trying to have a cohesive season. And, there was a break in the time around December, and football kind of unraveled. And so, it was a struggle to keep things moving forward, but certainly, the staff was on it all the time, and they all were working hard, making sure we had stuff up to date, and tried to get that out as much as we could through social media as well as on our website. But you're right, the staff worked overtime trying to stay on top of things.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into this discussion, because again, we have a lot of ground to cover. But before we get into that bulk of it, you actually just got back from the NFHS conference over in San Antonio. Sort of walk us through that. What did you hear from other states? Was there anything in particular that you can take away from that? Just walk us through that experience.
Well, it's funny. There are 51 associations, because you have the 50 states and DC that are members of the National Federation of High Schools. And so everybody always comes there. There's always topics of discussion. We have roundtables, and it's amazing that even though we're all so different, West Virginia and Texas have some of the same problems. We're all dealing with transfer portal on the high school level. We're dealing with disease, communicable diseases. We're dealing with transfers and things like that. And so everybody's dealing with the same thing. People have just tried different things that work for them. Everybody's trying to come up with the perfect tournament and selection of your tournament. And it's just good to talk to everybody and see how different states are dealing with certain issues. And, it's a good opportunity for us to gather and talk and see how everybody's dealing with the same situations.
Was there something creative that was said, or even something that somebody's doing in a different state that really caught your ear and you said, maybe this could be implemented in the West Virginia? Was there anything like that that really stood out that you're willing to share?
I think the one thing that was most important, and we'll see more of it maybe later on we're talking, but there is a program Ref Reps and Ref Preps. They're both by the same company. Ref Preps is the educational part. So they take all of the chapters of the rule book and break it down. Have slides, videos, tests, quizzes. And what I see coming from that is all of our officials, no matter what part of the state, they're all going to have the same training. They're all going to have the same information. And that can't be said. That's not always true right now. Just depends upon where you are. You know, what the different organizations are putting out there for training. So I think that's one of the big takeaways from this. You know, we've talked about how people are classification. You know, everybody's trying to look at a formula, you know, do a multiplier or something. And so I think it's but the biggest takeaway for this year was probably the officials training. And I think you'll see that implemented in West Virginia. Not only will we be implemented on our normal people, regular officials, but also we've lowered the age limit for officials to 16, and the 16 and 17-year-old kids will be able to work middle school games. So this will be a great opportunity to open up this training and education in the schools, as well as it's all online. So we can get that part out of the way and then do some on-field stuff. So I think hopefully we're trying to turn the corner on officials and the aging of them and trying to get younger. And we think this is going to be a big help.
Well, one of the first things that you had mentioned that you all heard from the people down in Texas was that you all, along with them, are dealing with this transfer portal. And also was brought up in the state legislation this past year, Senate Bill 586. You also were quoted in that, but let's sort of start from square one and then work our way up. What were your thoughts whenever that legislation was being pushed around about how student athletes here in West Virginia potentially could have had the offer, or even the capability, I should say, of being able to transfer one time, similar to what the immediate eligibility is like over on the collegiate level? What were your thoughts with that?
I think the first thing we did was we educated the legislature that students do have free choice in 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. So even going into high school, you can go, as long as you live with your parents, you can go wherever you want. So we think there is choice. We think the older you get, the more recruiting that's going to come along. Just look to see what's happening at the collegiate level. They're not going to be recruiting the high school kids quite as much. They're going to go to smaller colleges, work out for a little bit, and then they'll go into the portal and go to a bigger college. The bigger colleges will be working the transfer portal rather than taking chances on high school kids. So we think that's exactly what would happen at our level. When we deal with recruiting and transferring a lot as it is, I think it would open it up. You know, and we think that you should be playing for the school that you go to and where you live. And but if you're going to make an academic decision about going to a school, we think you should make it as a 9th grade, so it's a more cohesive, consistent education.
Obviously, as people, we obviously see these things, we hear these things, because it just seems like if somebody knows something, they're going to tell somebody, and then it just goes from there. It's like a weed almost. But it seems like there are student athletes across the state, and I'm not going to just say a specific region, because it happens everywhere, and it even happens nationwide for that matter. But from what you all hear and what you all see, is there a way to control this? Because the NCAA is not doing anything in regards to putting a cap on it, but do you think you could possibly be a pioneer in trying to figure out a way to stop it and put a cap on it?
Well, I think it's difficult because it's not the coach that's out there recruiting usually. Obviously, that's hard to prove. It's usually somebody in the community, somebody on a travel program, It's actually even the kids themselves that are out recruiting. So the hardest part is trying to definitely nail down when there is recruiting to institute a transfer. And we do the best we can. The schools do the best they can. We just hope that that's enough deterrent for people to do the right thing and follow the rules. One thing to keep in mind, it's always, not always, but oftentimes, it's the person you're displacing. He's going to be the person who tells on you. Everybody's okay with a transfer until it takes your position. So you were in the starting 5, you were in the starting 7, you might have been the starting wide receiver, and a great kid comes in. And if it's illegal, somebody is going to be reporting it either to the school or to us to start an investigation. And that's usually how it happens. Everybody wants to play fairly. So we hope that, you picked your school as a 9th grader, and, number one, we're student athletes, so students first. So we pick a school that matches our needs for academics, and we stick with them through 4 years. And that's where I think we're going to end up. And, we're making progress, but, it still goes on. You can't stop it.
Do you think that these counties that these kids are, jumping around in, because obviously it seems like it happens more internally in a county compared to going from one county to another. Do you think there's a way for counties and the SSAC to try and work together and try and, push the foot on the brake? Or how do you see a county stepping in with this? Or could it be handled differently?
Well, one thing is if it were going to change, I think, there would have to be a rule change put forth by our principals, but I think a lot of the times there's people out there who don't want to get involved, and they're going to say, I know what happened, but I'm not going to get involved, but for every coach or person who says that, it just perpetuates the problem. And so, we hope that everybody's going to follow the rules, and, we have opportunities. If you're caught and you're disciplined, we have methods that allow you to be heard by our board to verify the discipline, to make sure it meets the punishment and give you an additional chance to prove your case.
I want to go to something you had mentioned in an article that I read, and that was you had mentioned the appeals that came forth from February of this year to last February of 2021. You had mentioned that there were 115 appeals, and of those, 70 were approved. If you could just sort of talk about that appeal process and how difficult and how tiresome it can be for you all as the SSAC.
Well, first of all, our appeals start with the high schools or the member schools, high schools or middle schools. And so they're the first line. They'll make the initial determination. They all have our rule book. They know the rules. They voted for the rules. So they would determine somebody is eligible or ineligible. If they have questioned, they would call the office, and we would verify based on the facts that we know that person is either eligible or ineligible. If we've determined them to be ineligible, then we tell them there's a process to go through that you could be heard to see if your appeal will be overturned. And so that our board of directors meets once a month. We get all of our information in, we verify it, we give it to the board. You get 15 minutes to come before the board and speak your case. And the board has an opportunity to grant a waiver to that rule, which would make you eligible. If you're unsuccessful at that level, there's another level of appeal called the Board of Review, and they're appointed by the State Board of Education. And those 7 members could hear any case that gets upheld by the Board of Directors. So that's kind of the board, that's kind of our appeals process and how it works.
So along the way with that, it seems like there is a I'm not going to say it's a hidden code of rules because it's not, because it's obviously out there for people to look at. But along with these rules, it seems as with the SSAC, when they are enforced, they are used to try and almost implement a learning style of what you have to go through to get through this. And it's almost showing whoever is going through this appeal process that it's very difficult to, one, go through, but two, it just also seems like it's difficult that sometimes it may not work out in your favor. What would you have to say about that?
Well, number one, I would say it's not difficult. You do have to plan ahead. If you've been in the new school since the beginning of the year and we show up and it's baseball season and you're a baseball player, and in February, you're going to try to get your appeal started, that's a problem. You've known since August that you were ineligible because you transferred schools without moving or whatever. The school should be telling you immediately whether you're eligible or not. So the process really is pretty easy. They just email me to start the process. And then it's just a matter of 1 or 2 emails of them replying back with some paperwork, and then we get them on the schedule. So the actual process of getting it done is not very difficult, but you do have to be timely because our board gets all of our information about a week ahead of time. So we're having a meeting on the 21st. You know, if we don't have all of your material by Thursday of this week, you're probably not going to be heard this time. You'll have to wait until July or August to be heard, just because we want the board to have that information far enough in advance that they can read all of the cases. Some months we might have 6 or 8 appeals. Other months, we probably got 20 this time. So it's a lot of reading, a lot of preparation. So we want to give our board plenty of time.
One scenario that you mentioned, and I want to try and go a little bit more deeper with that, because it seems like it happens more so in the fall leading into winter sports, and this is my personal opinion, but it seems like it happens more from fall to winter sports, and that is, hypothetically, there is a player at one school who played football, was an excellent football player, and then they went over to play at a different high school with to play basketball just for a completely different program, and this is all in a span of a month and a half, maybe less than that for that matter. How is that possible? Because I know I hear that a lot amongst people on the outside. What would you say to that whenever somebody comes to you and they say, how is this player allowed to go and play football at one school and then go play basketball at another school?
The only way that you can, well, not, there's 2 ways. The way to be eligible is if you would have to do a physical move, bona fide move, according to our rules, after football season and before you started basketball with the other school. You had to make a bona fide move. Bona fide move means you abandon the house you were living in prior. The whole family moves. You get your driver's license switched to the new address, voting record to the new address. You know, no family member stays in the old house. You know, it's abandoned, it's up for sale, or it is rented or sold or something. So that's the only way, unless a court would say, you know, Bernie, you're required to go over here for whatever reason. There's a number of times the court could get involved, but for the most part, if you've seen that, it's probably a physical move by that family.
So on top of that, going back to the hypothetical, so they move from one house to another closer to that second school, but then that first house is still in their possession. That's still with them, but yet they still have another house closer to the second school. How does that work? If it's the same, or how is that still able to happen? Because I know, again, it's a hypothetical, but I'm just trying to figure it all out.
So if I move from County A to County B or school district, and I have my house back at the old place, if it's totally abandoned, I don't go back to it. You know, nobody lives there on the weekends. I don't go back and forth. I've moved to the other house. I've got that one up for sale. That's legitimate. That's okay. That's considered a bona fide move.
Okay.
However, if I would then decide, after basketball or after school's out to go back to that original house again, that would make my student ineligible for 365 days. Because part of the reason why when we say you're making a bona fide move is we say you're making it for permanent. But if you would make this move, keep your house, make the move, get the sport in you want at the school you want, and then go back to that same house, it's not a permanent move. And so therefore, the residence transfer rule would kick in and that student would be ineligible for 365.
And that's exactly what I was mentioning. So I'm glad you read my mind with that, because I was going down that route. So I'm glad that you caught on to that. So that clears a lot of things up, because as a former student athlete myself, I saw that, I heard it. I'm not going to name names or anything like that, because that's not what I do. But I'm just saying it seems like it happens, and then now as I've gotten older, you start to hear it more and stuff like that. But I'm glad that we clarified and cleared the air with that. So I appreciate that.
If I move back to my original community
Mhm.
and I'm in a different house, then it's a bona fide move again, as long as I don't go back to the original house. Trust me, there's lots of eyes on your original house. I mean, everybody around you who lost you as a teammate, family, they're all watching, so it's hard. There's no secrets. There's plenty of people out there. Obviously we have a staff of 9, 8 right now total. We don't have the manpower to go investigate every transfer. That's the responsibility of the schools. We do get involved if there's a disagreement among the leaving school and the receiving school.
Okay, so let's transition to this 4-class system, because this was the second year that it was completed. A lot of great feedback. You saw a different champion in Class Single A, because man won it in 2021, and James Monroe had an undefeated season, won it this past year. But again, we're going to start at score one and then work our way out. Overall thoughts on what you have seen these last 2 years with this new system?
I really like the new system, and I think you may see proposals to put this classification model, the formula, in all of our sports. Maybe not 4 classes in every sport, but at least instead of just using enrollment, using this formula. And so I think if you've gone to the tournaments, I thought the tournaments were very competitive. That's always the goal when we in our classes, is to try to make each class more competitive, top to bottom. And I think 2 years, or the first year of the model, we had a 7 and 2 8s, or 2 7s and an 8 that upset 1s and 2s. So I think it certainly gave us, it just justified what the model was trying to do, is to make it balanced. And so I think on that part, I think it worked out great.
Okay, so you mentioned it, and I want to talk about it, because people are still asking questions. What is this formula? What goes into this formula? It's no x squared plus y squared equals c squared, or whatever that formula is. I'm obviously not graduated. Yes, you're probably thinking, how did he graduate in 3.5 years? I'll answer that for you. I don't know. But Bernie, what is this formula, and what goes into this formula? Just for a clarification for people that may not understand it completely.
First of all, I'd stick with Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared.
That's what I was thinking of.
I knew where you were going. So that was easy. So what goes into the formula? Well, we have a competitive balance committee who has met multiple times. And really what we were looking for are, what were the factors that determine success in schools, in sports? And, oftentimes, obviously the biggest factor is size of school, but that was the factor that everybody used throughout the country. And then you've seen people do multipliers. Everybody gets a +1 if you have this kid, or if you had some people, if the amount of transfers moves you up a class. There was different things. We felt like the things that were important that we wanted to put into our system were, number one, were enrollment. Number two was how close you were to a city. Ultimately, I believe how close you are to a city has more to do with your success than how many students you have in school, because not all of them participate. But being close to a city gives you a lot of advantages. Number one, how many gyms do you have in your community? So if I'm in the Wheeling area, I've got my schools, I've got gyms, I've got fitness centers, I've got outdoor artificial turf places, indoor artificial turf places. Just opened up a facility that has 6 basketball courts. So the ability for the students in that area to get together is a lot easier than for students in, say, Calhoun or Pocahontas or Pendleton. Those students have to go a long way in order to find increase in facilities. Also in the cities, you got more people, you got more opportunity for training, you got more opportunity for coaching. So there's lots of, and the legal transfers happen more so in the city than they do in the country. So we feel like that was an important factor. And then ultimately, the economic factors in your county. Some counties are rich and they can afford those amenities that we were just talking about. They can build Shawnee Park. They can build the Highlands. They can build the center at Bridgeport. They have these places. They have YMCAs. So there's lots of examples. So in the formula, we put all the schools by their classification, put them all based on how close they are to the city, and then their economics. Enrollment is 70%, economics is 20, or I'm sorry, proximity to a city is 20, and economics is 10. And over time, we're going to have real data that's going to tell us what this is, which factor is more important. We have it after one year. We're working on year 2, and we'll go from there. Every year we do it, we'll be able to maybe tweak the system. Maybe we say it is more important how close you are to the city. So instead of 70 for our enrollment, it may be 65, and proximity to a city could be 25 instead of 20. So there's lots of things. I think you'll see, there might be a tweak before we go into our next round of classifications, but that committee will be meeting again in September.
Okay, so you had mentioned the enrollment and how it's 70% of this reclassification system. And I went back and looked at the 2020 numbers before this first system came into play. And there were, I don't remember who it was, but there was a team, or a school, I should say. There was a school that had 200 more students than the lowest class AAA school. How did that team with the 200 more students still stay a class below?
Well, again, enrollment, when we say enrollment, we have a mathematician who takes the numbers from 1950 or whatever, in this case, Morgantown's at, down to wherever Pickens is, or down in that area. And then they'll rank those schools from 1 to 100, not necessarily based on, it's based on their actual enrollment, but they get ranked 1 to 100. We do the same thing for your proximity, and that's what gets averaged together. So if that school was bigger than another school, but it was in the smaller class, then that would tell me it's more of a country school and didn't have all the advantages that a school in the city has. And so that 20% of proximity to the city and the 10% economics probably dropped that one down and the other school up, or schools.
Okay, so going back to the formula, I don't quickly remember whether or not you mentioned this, but the county seat as well also plays into this formula. Clarify that if you would, because again, there are still schools that are in quad A, that are in triple A, and obviously that county seat comes into play, but how does that exactly come into play?
Yeah, for the most part, the county seat was put in there to compare in big rural counties how the effect of being near the county seat was determined. That's something that may come out in the next round of classification. That part of the formula may be tweaked, and it may just be what's closest to the city. So it was a way to give justification on the country schools about where they were to the county seat. It's a double-edged sword. Obviously there's people who say, for instance, the private schools are in the city, and therefore, why should being near Elizabeth have anything to do with being near Charleston? Well, what you have is the city schools are getting a double ding because they're getting it for being in the city as well as the county seat. So it's not going to be as clean of a wash that people will say, as soon as I take that out, it's going to help all of the country schools. I don't think it's going to make as big a difference in the overall formula as people think.
Is there a metric on how far you have to be from that county seat for that formula to come into play with that metric?
It starts at 1. I mean, it starts at 1 and 0. And again, we rank those numbers 0 to 100, and that ends up being your number. So, and then that's what will get the 20%.
Okay. Well, good deal. Okay. So that clarifies some things as well. So another thing that people have also floated around just from what you hear, what you see, and everything else, but it seems like that this 4-class system was revolved around or even centered around a certain group of schools within the state of West Virginia. And quite frankly, people think it's the Catholic schools. And obviously, I'm not one to say that it is. I'm not saying that it isn't. What would you say to that? Because that seems to be an understanding that people have developed over the last 2 years with this new system.
Well, first of all, I would say that the private schools are, for the most part, in the cities, so they do benefit. But there are also public schools who are within these boundaries of cities also that benefit. We're here in Parkersburg, and just in Parkersburg, you've got Parkersburg South, Williamstown, Wood County Christian, and Parkersburg Catholic. All of those people are pretty close to Parkersburg and Marietta. So all of those schools all benefit pretty much the same. And so I wouldn't say that it was a way to punish the private schools. I would say it was a way of justifying and saying that there are advantages to being close to a city, not just being a Catholic school or a private school. The advantages are there's a lot more access to facilities, a lot more access to people, to coaches. And so we tried to quantify what that was. And it moved some of the private schools up. It didn't move them all up. And obviously, in the first 2 years, some of the private schools even went up another class. So some of them competed in the AAA when the formula only took them to double. Now, this year, you'll see them all come back down to where they belong, and they're going to play there. And I think these next 2 years are going to give us a pretty good idea of how this formula works and whether or not it needs to be adjusted. But also, I think it does show that people are put where they belong according to the advantages that their school has.
Why do you think that we are seeing schools that moved up 2 classes now move back down a class into that class, as you just said, that fits the formula? Why are we seeing this now?
Well, I think people thought it's only for 2 years. Let me take a chance. We recently changed a rule that said you can go up and down in just a sport also. In the past, you had to take all of your sports up a class, so now you could just take your boys basketball team or your girls basketball team up. Oftentimes schools, just because you're good in one, boys or girls, doesn't mean you're good in the other. So this gave those schools the opportunity just to go up in one class. I think some of them found out, hey, let's go back down. I think we're better suited down. But my opinion, no harm, no foul. They were able to go up there and try it out and see what they felt like. They could have stayed, or they could move, have moved back. And for the most part, I think almost all of them moved back, but not all.
So hypothetically, and I probably know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway because people may have this question after this is posted. But if there is a team in AAA or even AA, or any of the 3 classes that are above single A, is there a way for them to move down since these other schools are doing that, or does that have to be signed off by this formula?
Well, once you're assigned by the formula, we do have a rule that is up for vote. It was passed by our membership, and it'll be voted on by the State Board of Education this week, that gives the school, if you're unhappy with your classification, that you could come present before our board of directors to adjust your classification. And so that'll be an opportunity for schools. I think it's going to be a tall task. I think you're really going to have good reason as to why they should move your school down. But ultimately, there is a rule that's going to give you that opportunity this year.
Well, that's news.
Yeah, that's one of our new proposals.
Okay, good. I like it. So let's go to the team side then, and I want to start with this 3-week period because, as you mentioned in the beginning, teams have already concluded their 3-week period, and there are teams and schools now that are starting their 3-week period. And the main thing that you hear from people is there a way for the SSAC or the board of directors or whoever it may be, is there a way to implement a system where it is an extended 3-week period, meaning that you have the entire offseason except maybe 2 weeks, maybe, because I believe Kentucky does that, where it's almost year round that they can work with the kids except for a 2-week span during the live period at the beginning of July, which we are in right now. But is there a way, or could you see that being implemented where a coach can work hands-on with his or her players throughout a whole cycle of maybe 350 days, maybe? Could we see that?
Well, first of all, I hope not. But I'm not really. And I think part of there's a misunderstanding of how the organization works. Our member schools decide this period of time. They vote in the rules. They create the rules. Our office here is charged with interpreting the rules and making decisions when there's conflict between the schools. So if that were to happen, and that was brought up a couple of years ago, and it's like everything else, it'll be brought up again. But the reason, as I remember why it didn't, is that if you allow year-round coaching without any controls, you're going to have sports who are going to dominate your school. And so your football coach is going to say, I need you lifting, I need you doing this, you can't do X, Y, and Z. And the basketball coach is going to say, I need you every day. The only way you're going to get better is playing and having me coach you every day. So you can't play football, you can't play baseball, run track, and so on. So as I remember the discussion, it was more about, what would happen. People would dominate different schools, and we actually would have less participation because there would be more specialization. So, you get 3 weeks in the summer, and you get 12 flex days. So in a 5-day week, that's almost 3 more weeks. That's 6 weeks you can use throughout the year outside of your season. So if you were going to work with your kids and you got almost 6 weeks, I'm not sure you need much more than that. And certainly the kids and the coaches need breaks from each other, I think.
So along those lines, and I have heard this from other coaches before, that go out and they play. We'll use Kentucky as an example because there are teams in the southern portion of West Virginia that do go out and play these Kentucky schools. And by the looks of it, they start almost a whole month before the state of West Virginia does. Do you think that there may be a way to try and work out a solution to where we could see different sports being pushed back? I mean, obviously the big question is with these fall sports is football, because football practices, according to this, start August 1, and then first contests are the 22nd. So, and then that pretty much just floods in everything else, it seems like. But then when you look at basketball, November 14th is the first day for practice. December 6th is the first day for contest. But then you look at what Kentucky's doing. Kentucky, they're going October 15th with the first practice, November 28th with the first contest. And then football, they're pretty much going with helmets. And they started it 2 days ago on July 10th. So, and then they're working it out full gear August 1, first games August 19th. So is there a solution to this? Because it seems like there is an understanding or even just an analysis, so to speak, and that is when these teams in West Virginia go out and play these outside schools, it seems like they are already behind before they even step onto the respected playing field, because these outside states are getting they're getting more time with their coach, they're getting more conditioning, and they're getting more fundamental drills and stuff like that. I know that's a lot to soak in, but that's just what I've heard over this last year and a half to 2 years.
Right. Well, if you think about it, number one, we're bordered by Pennsylvania, High, Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland, DC. It would be hard to try to come up with something that would match all of those, but I also think that, you have flexibility in that 3-week window. There are some schools that are starting their 3-week window right now. They're almost going to roll right into August 1st, So you take your 3 weeks plus your 12 flex days, you use some of them in June, some of them later in July, and you're pretty much, you have access to your players almost all summer. Obviously, we have the dead week of July 4th that nobody's allowed to do anything, but you could almost roll right into it. If you started today or yesterday, your 3-week window would take you right up to almost August 1st. So you could do some of the same things, but there's also that same group. There's another rule of thought is that kids need to be away a little bit too. If you start July 10th and you really can't do anything but helmets, how do you keep them active until August 1st when you can start your progression for equipment? And, so I think it's out on both sides. I think with our 3-week window and 12 flex days, I think it gives the coaches a lot of opportunity to do all the things you're talking about and still not fall behind.
So then along those lines, then you had mentioned how there are different people that come up with those dates for the 3-week period. could you see the possibility of running a 3-week period after the wow, I just totally butchered that. After the 4th of July, because when you go to this 3-week period, it's almost following baseball, the baseball season as well, because that's the very last championship of the whole scholastic season. So they're pretty much rolling into their 3-week period on such short notice. Do you think that there could be a way in July to implement that 3-week period and then pretty much go along with what I just said? And that is, you're almost, nudging shoulders with these other states. That way these schools can get as much time instead of getting minimal to any time, so to speak.
Well, I would disagree with you. I think the 3-week window can go 3 consecutive weeks
Mhm.
from the Monday after football or baseball clear to the Friday before the first day of fall sports. So they have that window in there that they could move that 3-week window. Some have moved it to the month of July. We don't set it. We say, here's your window.
Okay.
That's what the schools have wanted. Now, also up for vote this year and passed, so we're waiting on the state board, is that instead of a county having to commit to a whole 3-week, each school would have the opportunity to have a different 3-week. So in the Kanawha Valley, Charleston area, GW could be, the 3 weeks from July 4th, after July 4th on. South Charleston might be the first 3 weeks of June. So it just depends upon what they're doing and what their philosophy is. And I think that allowing our schools to do it is going to give everybody the flexibility. If they think it's important to progress with football and drills and everything early on, you still have to follow the rules, but you can implement a lot of your stuff prior to ever going to August 1. So I think we got what Kentucky has, and probably even better if the coaches need it that way. They've got that 3 weeks, 3 weeks plus another 12 days. So I think they can take both June and July and get most of it.
And that makes sense. And I completely agree with what you said, because it seems like you're reading my mind, because we're going back and forth, but at the same time we're connecting. And that is, I think that the best scenario, which you all have already done, is giving the schools that option of when their 3-week period is, whenever that may be, from the first Monday after baseball season to the beginning of school year, to the beginning of the school year, I should say. That opportunity or that availability is there. So that makes sense. And I think that's a good way to make what I said even more sense. So that makes that's true.
And I want to clarify again, it's not us giving them, it's our schools
Right.
voting, putting the rules up, voting for the rules. So oftentimes people say those are SSAC rules. Well, the SSAC really is our 286 members. That's the SSAC. We're just the office that runs the tournaments and does interpreting of the rules in addition to the schools. So everybody is part of the SSAC, every school.
So one thing I would like to clarify is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, so with these schools, once that school says this is what we're going to do, that has to apply to all sports. Different sports cannot just go branch off and do their own 3-week period. What the school says has to be applied for all sports from top to bottom.
That's correct.
Okay.
But again, you got the 12 flex days. So if you want to do something outside your 3-week window, you've got 12 flex days to do it.
So it would need to be not a consensus, but it would need to be an overwhelming vote for that yes vote to be, we're going to do it on a different day, compared to this is the set beginning, so to speak, for that first Monday after baseball to pretty much the week before the 4th of July. So that makes more sense. So thank you for the clarification with that.
Okay.
So another thing that really gets brought up, it seems like anytime that anybody discusses basketball season, or we're in the heat of basketball season, and quite frankly, even when we get into March, is the shot clock. You knew I was going to go there. You knew I was going to go there. But
Yeah.
you got back from this NFHS conference in San Antonio, and there were states there that have implemented it into their high school athletics. What do you see as the possibility? Because before you answer that, I did my homework. I did my homework because I read the interscholastic book from last year for the winter period. And according to one of the new rules, I'm going to read it. And it says, by state association adoption, effective with the 22-23 season, member state associations may establish a shot clock in which the team in control shall attempt a try for field goal within 35 seconds after gaining team control. Art 1, this shall be regulated by a visible shot clock. And Art 2, the tap or try for field goal shall leave the shooter's hand before the expiration of time and subsequently strike the basket ring or enter the basket before or after the shot clock period has expired. And then in parentheses after that, the WVSSAC has not adopted this rule to date. So before you answer what I just said, because I know I'm going off a different rabbit hole, down a rabbit trail, but talk about that, because again, you all have not adopted this yet. Talk about that rule. What exactly are we reading it like? Just give us the Reader's Digest of what I just read.
Okay, again, I mean, everybody's watched college basketball and the NBA. You have a shot clock, and you've got to get that shot off, or it's got to hit the rim before the buzzer goes off, or you lose the possession. That part is simple. What our people, in high school, you don't get to pick your players. You don't get kids to come in to your system and say, I'm recruiting only shooters and or big guys or this or that. And so you have to take people that come along. And sometimes, you want a fast game, and other times you want a slow game. And so I think it gives our coaches the ability to coach the kids that they have. But we also have a coaches committee. We have a committee of 8 boys coaches and 8 girls coaches. And we just met last month or 2 months ago, and it's still not overwhelming that they want it. I mean, most people are saying, we're not ready for it. We don't know if we even need it. I mean, we haven't gone back and looked at the state tournament, but I would have to think, other than a few teams in prior years, there's probably not many people that hold the ball more than 35 seconds. They're either turning it over or shooting it a lot quicker than that. So I would say there's not a great desire amongst our coaches to get it done yet. But I think it's not just a basketball issue too. It is a issue that it's going to be your hardest person to fill. You can't just put somebody over there to start and stop the clock like you do a regular clock. You got to reset. You got to know when to reset. And that person's got to be Johnny on the spot. So there's going to be some financial cost to the school to get it started, but there's also going to be a financial cost and a quality thing that you got to find good quality people. Oftentimes people are not able to find quality people to work the games as it is. So it would be another position.
Okay, so let's get you on the record. And do you think we could see a shot clock in the next, I'll give a time frame, 4 to 5 years?
Oh, it's hard for me to say whether or not there would be one. Again, it would be what's changed over time. It's hard to say. I would say we're not moving very quickly. So 5 years is a long time.
Right.
So it would be hard for me to give you an answer on that. I would say if we're counting on how far we've gone from last year to this year, I would say the needle hasn't moved much, and it would have to move significantly before we get to having the shot clock.
So what would happen for that needle to move?
Our coaches would have to say, hey, we want to change this game. They'd have to recommend it to us that we change it.
So you mentioned the economic perspective or standpoint of it. When you actually break it down, yes, you are going to have to pay somebody to go through the training for it, then go through actually doing it on a game by game basis. And as you said, they have to be Johnny on the spot. From the economic standpoint, is if this were to happen down the road, how could the dollar amount come into play to find the necessary people to do this? I mean, is there a way you could do it during the state tournament since you have an extra official there, or even two extra officials there, or how could that go into play? Again, like you said, you are going to need somebody to be Johnny on the spot with this.
First of all, I wouldn't propose or be in favor of doing anything in the tournament that we don't do in the regular season.
Okay.
I would think that if we're going to have a shot clock, you have to have it. You know, schools would have to, whoever's hosting the regionals would have to have the shot clock. You know, so purchasing and that and setting it up is one thing. Getting people to run at each game is another. So I think there are those challenges, but I think until our coaches come back and say, yes, we're ready, we want this, we think we need it, I'd be surprised if we take it. It'll be a slow move unless there's a big change in our coaches committee's opinions.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So you brought up the state tournament, and again, this is definitely a frequent discussion when people discuss high school basketball in West Virginia, because quite frankly, on my first coaches roundtable, I spoke with Dave Rogers, Mick Price, and Rick Green, and they said that, you know, the state tournament is almost unmatched to a lot of our surrounding states because everybody is in one generalized location, and it brings in a lot of economic value. It brings in a lot of, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of fans, a lot of great passion, enthusiasm, whatever that may be. But we'll start here with the state tournament. Could we see a different path for different teams to get to Charleston? Meaning, there have been thoughts around, including myself, that has come up with something where you obviously you want the regional representation, which is fine. But when you look at each of these classes and you go from, let's just do class 4A. When you look at the teams that were so successful last year, 3 of those teams resided in Charleston. You had George Washington, you had Capital, and you had South Charleston as well. All in the same section, all in the same region as well, because they would have to go play the teams down in Cabell County as well, or even up in Parkersburg, or just wherever for that matter. But you had 3 teams right there that were arguably 3 of the better teams in Class Quad A, but yet only one of those teams got out. So my question to you is, could we see a different path for teams to get to Charleston?
Well, first of all, basketball does have a system that allows more than one team to get out of a section. And that's why basketball has that particular model. There's a lot of people that aren't crazy about that model, and there's people who love it, you know. But in the case that you're talking about, we had South Charleston, Capital, and GW, you know. So one of those guys, one of those teams would lose. The other 2 would be in the championship of the section. And then there's a crisscross between the other section and your region. And you had GW go to, I can't remember, they were the winner or the loser, but and then South Charleston went the other way. But you do have the opportunity to get 2 teams out of your section in basketball to the state tournament. So can you get all 3? Probably not. You know, it would be difficult. I know there's lots of people who probably look at football and say, hey, why don't we rate them and do the top 16 and run the tournament like that? And, you know, every sport wants to do that, but you can't imagine traveling across the state in the middle of winter and going from city to city, Wheeling to Welch or Wheeling to Bluefield or Beckley on a school night, not knowing the weather. If you're going from Charleston to Beckley, that's one thing. But, you look at football, we've had some incredible travels. And those people can travel either Thursday night or Friday night. But if we have to do it, it makes it difficult if it's not. Football doesn't get canceled very often. So it's a little easier to do football that way than it is other sports.
And I'm glad you brought that up. And I know I went down a different rabbit trail with what I was telling you or what I was asking. But so here's what I had put together. And I just want to run this by you. That way you can understand where I'm coming from. So like football, because again, I'm one of the, I seem like I'm one of those people, so to speak, that says, okay, what about football and everything else? But what I put together was you take the top, 15 teams, you get the first team that automatic bye. And then that first round is your sectional. Your second round is your regional championship, because obviously, as you said, you have to have, now at least, you have to have regional representation. And then when you get to your final four, that is your state tournament. So what I mean by all of this is, excuse me, with these 16 teams, it'd be 16 on one side, 16 on the other. So you have 32 teams in total. And one half of the bracket is your northern portion. So you have teams like University, Morgantown, Jefferson, Martinsburg, Hedgesville. And on the other side, you have your George Washington, South Charleston, Capital, Parkersburg South, and all those schools. Because I understand where you're coming from, and that's why I wanted to tell you this, because I seem like I did the dirty work. But is there a way that you could see it like that? Because again, you're trying to minimize that travel, but then when you get to your final four, they're all having to come to one location as well. So you're playing your sectional and regionals in your half of the state, whether that be the north or the south, and then you play it like that, and then you get to your final four and they meet at one generalized location. What do you think about that? And I know that's a lot to, again, soak in, but that's what I put together, and I really wanted to throw that at you. What do you think to what I just said?
Well, I think it's probably not in what most people are thinking. You're bringing less people to the state tournament. So you would be bringing four from each. Would you bring four from each side or two from each side?
Two from each side.
Okay. The thing we hear from our schools is they want more teams at every tournament. Yeah, they're trying to figure out how to get more teams. They don't mind paying the bill to go to the state tournament, but it is expensive for these schools to travel by bus to some of their games. So I wouldn't think that our membership would want to go less teams to the state tournament. I think they would want, they're in basketball, they're comfortable with 8. We had a proposal to go to 32 or to include all schools in football, because football is the only sport we don't get an automatic qualifier to at least the play-in tournament, the sectionals or regionals. So, that did not pass our membership either. But I think our membership has a pretty good grasp of things, and they're always looking. People always want to know how they can make it to Charleston or Wheeling or wherever it is easier. That seems to work for them, but it's getting everybody to agree that that's the best way to do it is a different story.
Okay, so think about it like this then. So I mentioned to you what I just said and what I had put together, which is fine. I understand that. What you said, I completely agree with as well. And I just put it together just to see what you thought. But one other thing that continues to grow in sports, regardless if it's high school athletics, college athletics, and professionals as well, is the growth of analytics. And obviously there doesn't really seem to be a whole lot of analytical things within the state that goes into seedings because it's more of a voting process. But if you were to expand, could you see an analytics side come into play whenever you do have more teams, or even somebody say, hey, if we want to expand, instead of doing a word of mouth or a voting system, could we move towards or transition to an analytics format?
I've seen people talk about trying to come up with a formula. Bill Hanlon, who was in this office in the 70s, he's the one that really figured out our football formula and has worked that. It would take somebody like that who had a desire to change basketball to some sort. But I don't think it would leave, that might be way to rank the final eight, but I wouldn't think that we would be into some system like that to be zigzagging across the state for the tournament.
So I know we keep throwing a lot of formulas at the audience, but from the formula standpoint for football, I don't know it as well. I know of it, but for people that may not know it, what is that formula that goes into football? That way they can try and, as you said,
Yeah.
they'll try and make something of their own while they're listening to this.
It's not as complicated as some people may think. It's just a lot of skulls and you got to run down a lot of things. But number one, if you beat a AAA school, you get 12 points. If you beat a double A school, you get 9. If you beat a single A school, you get 6. And so that's level 1 points. Level 2 points basically says if you beat a school, if the team you beats a school their size or higher, you get a bonus point. If you beat somebody who doesn't play a very good schedule, you don't get very many bonus points. So there's an incentive to play people who are better because you want to get their bonus points. You don't want to play an 0-10 because you're going to get 6, 9, or 12 points only. Where if you play a team that's 5-5, you might get 17. And so we're at the point where 1 or 2 points could be the difference between you hosting and you traveling. And again, the difference in football between hosting and traveling could be a couple $1,000 bill that you might have to pay if you're the visiting team.
And then also along these lines, with the state tournament, people also try and have this idea, or even this thought process as well, of could we see the state tournament move? Because obviously people love the Charleston Coliseum and Convention Center, but then they're also saying, is there a way that it could be moved? I mean, I know a lot of that is from an economics and a financial standpoint, but what would you say to those people that may have the idea of, hey, why do they not move it around the different spots over like you had mentioned with this classification system, maybe every 2 years, every 3 years and stuff like that? What would you say to that?
Well, almost all of our sports, we have not bid out basketball because there has not been an area that has requested it. We haven't bid out tennis. We have not bid out track officially, I don't think, because it's hard to find a facility big enough to handle our state track meet. But every other event that we have, it is bid out every 4 years. And so different communities have the ability to bid on hosting the tournament. So you could be in one place for 4 years and then go to another place. But, rotating it any faster than that really makes it difficult for the host school to raise money. Because if you're here today and gone tomorrow and back year 3, people that I have fundraised with to get the benefits in football, to give the bags and the shirts and those other little goodies to the schools and to pay for housing for schools, those people, that money's gone year 2. It's hard to get it back year 3. So that's why it's on a 4-year cycle, is to give those local committees the opportunity to have long, consistent times where they can fundraise to help raise the level of the game for those teams and schools and players.
As we transition, I want to ask a quick coach question, because this is a question that, I've really thought about. Somebody had also mentioned it to me as well, but I understand that coaches are getting paid by the county, and I understand that that money comes from that Board of Education as well. But in your eyes, could there be a possibility, or even an option, so to speak, for a coach to receive a stipend for coaching the respective sport? Now, I understand that you're going to have to figure out that number or that dollar amount across all sports, across all schools, and whatever that may be, that I don't know. But when you think about it, there could be a way. Obviously, the question is, or the thought process is, it just wouldn't work just from a financial standpoint. But when you think about it, I actually thought about this last night. When you think about it, you sit on the state is sitting on a large sum of money that was given to us by the federal government. Now, granted, that's up to state politicians to figure out whether or not they would like to do that. But my personal belief, this is my personal belief, but if a legislator or if a politician in the state is willing to discuss high school athletics and try and improve it, could they not work alongside with the SSAC and try and figure out what a stipend could be to give these coaches to continue to almost encourage younger people to stay in the state, coach in the state, and be successful in the state in whatever field of sport they would like to play in? What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, the SSAC is a private nonprofit organization. So the legislature would not be giving us money. We're not a state agency. They could build money or build spots into the state aid formula, and dedicate it toward coaches' salaries, I guess. But it's really the responsibility of the employer, which is each local county who is hiring these coaches. And it's up to them to try to give as fair of salary to those schools or those coaches as they best can. But, I'm sure coaches I was a coach for a long time, never felt like I was overpaid. Certainly my time was more valuable, but we always wanted to coach, loved the coach. Probably the biggest part that I miss right now is not coaching. But, I think that has to come from the county to give them any sort of stipend.
Understood. That makes sense. But the last couple of things I want to focus on is I'll get to the officials in the last part, but I want to talk about student athletes very briefly. And in my second coaches roundtable with Coach Dave Tallman from Morgantown, Scott Soro from Williamstown, and Zach Green from Logan, one of the questions I had asked them, Bernie, was what they do to try and give awareness to mental health with these student athletes. And I gave a percentage that above 30, I think it's 30 or 32% of student athletes nationwide suffer from some type of mental health issue, so to speak. And I'm just curious, what do you think, if anything, could happen to try and tackle mental health nationwide, or even within the state? Because obviously there is it's not a crisis, but there's definitely a situation with student athletes at such a young age trying to figure out what they want to do, how to fit in, how to make a team, and all these different things. But as the WVSSAC, how do you go about encouraging awareness for mental health?
Well, first of all, thanks for asking that question, because I think it's very important. My time prior to being here, I was the AD and principal at Wheeling Park. And I saw a lot of, there was a lot of kids struggling from mental illness at that time. What COVID did was put us all into a closed room and enclosed and cut off our communication and our closeness to each other. So I think it did make it worse on that. I do think that one of the best ways for overcoming some of this is to be involved in sports and activities. And again, we oversee all high school or most high school sports, but we also oversee band. We just started robotics. We have a large number of activities. Every school will have, theater, drama, speech and debate, different types of bands. I think the most important thing for these kids is to join activities that certainly give them joy. Sometimes you coach or you play, I think back to my days, and football and track were my two serious ones. And I did wrestling, believe it or not, for the fun of it for a while. And, so you do have to have some of these activities that you're just doing it for relaxation and fun. And it's not all. Now, if you're a star, you're going to be super competitive no matter what. But for a lot of kids, you just want to participate, and you want to participate without consequences, just for fun, relax. If you strike out at baseball, so what? You go back and you sit down, you get your glove, and you go out on the field. It's not the end of the world. So I think participation in all extracurricular activities would be a great benefit to these student athletes.
Along with getting involved as a student athlete, they are obviously wanting to get exposure. And exposure is a big thing, whether or not you want to pursue the collegiate rankings of your respective sport. And one question that's really floated around recently is, how do you think the SSAC could help student athlete exposure? Meaning, is there a way that something could be created or implemented that really showcases what these student athletes are doing? Or do you just think that's more of a team by team basis?
I really think that is a school, a community, and a family decision. I don't think it's really, we wouldn't be personable enough to do it from the office in Parkersburg. We wouldn't do justice to a kid who might be in Harrison County, So we're certainly not getting times and distances and things like that for all these kids. So with today's day and age of all this technology, certainly families or schools have all kinds of access to be able to provide evidence to, for recruiting and getting the word out. And you see it more and more. I mean, their kids are self-promoting all the time. It's kind of the world we're in. And we would probably not be able to do it as well, and they probably wouldn't like it if we were doing it. So I think you'll see more and more of that, of these people doing it on their own.
Along with that, one individual had mentioned that the potential for a a stats page, because when you go on the SAA website, there is a tab for stats, and obviously the SSAC keeps track of previous championship winners across all sports, but obviously that would be very, very difficult to do. But what would you say to somebody that brings the stats page to you as a suggestion, or even as an idea to try and, again, help promote or even help give an opportunity for these students' statistical categories to be published? Because you don't really see that a whole lot anywhere across the internet. But I'm just curious, what would you say to that?
Well, number one, I would say I would be happy if everybody reported their scores to us, let alone their stats. And so we have a terrible time of getting scores all the time. especially during football and basketball season, we're harassing people so that we can get our ratings in and get ready to do the balloting in basketball because people aren't putting them in. We have tried to, we've made a partnership with Max Preps, and that seems to be an easier way to generate stats because anybody can be putting stats in. We kind of have administrative rights for the schools, and they don't want to give that away to just a parent. Whereas for Max Preps, they could do that. They could assign somebody and they could be putting in the stats, and they do follow. So I certainly would support people following Max Preps and putting their stats up there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Because I'm a numbers person, so anytime I see some numbers, I'm right there. So I will definitely agree with you because I do use Max Preps whenever I am working as well. So I will help promote that as well.
Yeah, I think they're good.
But one last question about student athletes, and that is, are we seeing, so let me say it like this. When you look at the numbers for student athletes across all sports, I mean, according to this article that I was reading, with an estimated 35,000 to 40,000 high school student athletes in the state, has that number been steady over the last 5-10 years maybe, or are we seeing a slight decline in that number?
I think we're definitely seeing a slight decline. Now, did COVID play a part? Probably, but we were declining before that. But what we don't know is the decline bigger than the percentage of drop in school enrollment itself? You look at our enrollments in our schools, and it's dropping off consistently from year to year. And so we're trying to determine, is the drop off in participation more than that drop off, or is it consistent? I would think that our drop off for participation is less than the drop off in enrollment just in the schools. Kids that are participating will stay in the school longer than other kids who drop out or move or do something else.
So then why are we seeing a slight decline even before COVID with these high school athletes enrollment?
I think just enrollment in schools is going down. I think there are less families, there are smaller families. I always joke, I come from a family of 12, but I have three kids. So, you talk about how you just look at that. When I grew up on the island, we were 12, there was an 11, there's a 10, there was 2 9s. Just on the island was huge families. Now, if you have a family of 4 or 5, people look at you strange walking down the street. So I think enrollment is based on families are having fewer and fewer kids.
Yeah, I understand that. So couple more, and I want to focus this last portion of this interview and podcast about the officials, because I did have Brian Holstein, who's a veteran WVSSAC official, back on episode 111. And I'll ask you, Bernie, just from your perspective, why are we seeing a shortage of officials statewide?
Well, I think there's lots of things. Number one, I think fan behavior is bad. And I think some officials just say, the heck with it. I'm not putting up with this for the $50, $60, $70, whatever it is. It may be $70 and I had to pay $30 to get there and get home. So I think that's a frustration. I don't think they can ever make as much as they want because the schools can't afford what they would like to pay them. Schools are running, they're having to earn their money through ticket sales and trying to pay all the expenses, including officials, from that revenue. So it gets to be a challenge. I think also, we as in an organization, as well as the officials organization, have to do better training for the officials. I think the more confident an official is, the more likely they can hang in there. They know they're doing the right thing. They're making the right calls, and usually the people yelling at them don't know the rules. So, but certainly, fan behavior is one. People are busy. It's just hard for people to give up the time that's necessary to be good as an official, but also, you might be traveling every night. So it makes it difficult. Your job might not allow it. So it's a multifaceted problem.
Understood. Yeah. And then what would you say to those, well, let me say it like this. How can you and the SSAC encourage these younger people? Because obviously, according to Brian, it seems that the average age for an official in West Virginia is right into the mid 50s, and that's a startling number, just because it's true. A lot of the officials that you see are older, and obviously they're in their mid 50s, maybe 60s for that matter. But what can the SSAC do to encourage younger people to get involved with officiating?
I think number one, we had a rule that said you couldn't officiate till you were 18. We just passed a change to that said you could, at 16 or 17, you can officiate. You can officiate middle school games and some youth sports, but you had to have a veteran with you to teach you the ropes, almost to be a mentor. So I think we're going to try to get more younger people involved. Certainly give them the opportunity to have a employable skill no matter where they go. If you become a basketball official in high school, 17 or 18 years old, you go off to college, it's still a pretty good gig while you're in college to work some games, make some money. It would beat working at a fast food restaurant or a shop or something like that. So we're trying to make it more open to the younger students and hopefully give them better training so that they're more likely to stay in. We know that through studies that years 1, 2, and 3 are the most crucial. So our boards have to do a good job. Each local board needs to take care of their young kids that they're bringing on, make sure they're getting appropriate games, and make sure they're always working with a veteran who can help them, not only protect them on the court in the sense that they can handle the difficult situations, but also the mentoring that can go on. So I think that's what's going to help our youth get involved. We're trying to get it into our high schools. Over this summer, we're working on a curriculum to get it accepted by the schools and let them start teaching. And then I think that'll help us get a real influx of young people who are able to run up and down the floor in the court and, haven't been away from the game very long, and certainly probably a good opportunity for them to be officials, but also for us to get people who are able to stay up with the game.
And then finally, Bernie, I want to end on this note. And I know I keep throwing out a bunch of different timelines, but what would you, as the executive director of the WVSSAC, what do you want your all's organization to look like in the next 7 to 8 years? I mean, I know that's a long time from now, but over this next few years, what would you like you and your staff to really focus on over these next few years?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, we just talked about officials. We certainly have to get our officials' crews to be younger, to be better educated, to learn the rules and be confident in what they know. If we don't have officials, we can't have games. Number two, we got to get them into coaching. We got to get schools to pick out kids who are leaving the game because they can't play in college to be able to coach and get them coaching for them. Number three, I think activities. We have We've always had band as our only activity. We've brought on robotics. I think over the next 5 years, hopefully, we will see other activities that we would bring on that would bring new kids in. Not necessarily a sport that brings in, your football players who are going to do it in the fall or spring. It would breed new kids that bring them into an experience where they get to challenge for a state championship. And I think the excitement about robotics this year was pretty strong, and we were excited about that. So I think those are the things that I see happening over the next 5 years. Hopefully we can continue to move in that direction.
Well, Bernie, thank you so much for your time. I know this was a very long interview, but I think we hit a lot of great ground, and I'm very appreciative of your time. So thank you so much for joining me.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely. That will conclude episode 114 of Hoops Across the Mountain State with the WVSSAC Executive Director, Mr. Bernie Dolan himself. A lot of ground covered. If you missed anything, go back, listen to it, and believe me, a lot of great information was provided. So as always, thank you all for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can also follow me on Twitter at Taylor_Kennedy7 for all the latest about this podcast. And I will see you all next time on 115 of Hoops Across the Mountain State. Thank you all for listening, and stay safe.